Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are still working on King Richard II, and today we get to hear from John of Gaunt in Act 2, Scene 1, because as I told you, John of Gaunt talks a lot in Act 2, Scene 1, and mostly what he has to say is that he is disappointed in King Richard. So King Richard wants to go fight a war in England, but is on his way to see Gaunt because Gaunt is about to die and has summoned him. Richard would be perfectly happy to show up and find Gaunt already dead so that he can just take Gaunt's money and go fight the war in Ireland. So the top of Act 2, Scene 1, we have Gaunt talking with York, awaiting the king's arrival, and yesterday Gaunt shared sort of a lovely love letter to England, wherein he talked about this beautiful isle, this sceptered isle, this jewel of the ocean, and how thoroughly Richard has destroyed it, and how he plans on relaying that to Richard when Richard shows up. And as soon as he's done with this love letter, which he doesn't actually write. He says it. He doesn't actually write it. Just want to make that clear. Richard and his train come in, and that includes like Richard and the Queen and probably O'Merle and some other people, blah, 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 blah. And they come in and they're like, "How you doing?" And Gaunt's like, "You're a terrible person." And they're like, "You're looking kind of thin," except they use the word Gaunt, which happens to be his name. So he expounds for a little while using the word Gaunt in about 13 different ways within 11 lines. It's just barely too short to be a monologue for this project, otherwise I'd share it with you. But he's like, "I'm gaunt for the grave, and the country's gaunt, and those who want food are gaunt, so I'm looking gaunt," and blah, 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 all this stuff. And King Richard is like, "Oh, can men who are so sick really play with their names so well?" And Gaunt's like, "You know, I may be sick, but you're also sick," or like, "I'm not sick, you're sick." And it turns into a little back and forth that's sort of like, "I'm rubber, you're glue. Are you sick? Am I sick? Who's sick? We don't know who's sick." Until finally Richard's like, "I'm not sick. I'm in perfect health. You're the one that's ill." And Gaunt says, "Now he that made me knows I see thee ill. Ill in myself to see, and in thee seeing ill. Thy deathbed is no lesser than the land wherein thou liest in reputation sick. And thou, too careless patient as thou art, committ'st thy anointed body to the cure of those physicians that first wounded thee. 1,000 flatterers sit within thy crown, whose compass is no bigger than thy head, and yet encaged in so small a verge, the waste is no whit lesser than thy land. Oh, had thy grandsire, with a prophet's eye, seen how his son's son should destroy his sons, from forth thy reach he would have laid thy shame, deposing thee before thou wert possessed, which art possessed now to depose thyself. Why, cousin, wert thou regent of the world, it were a shame to let this land by lease. But for thy world enjoying but this land, is it not more than shame to shame it so? Landlord of England art thou, and not king. Thy state of law is bondslave to the law, and then he gets cut off by Richard, who calls him old and feeble and frail and insane, and dismisses everything that he has to say because John of Gaunt is old, and because Richard's offended, because let's be honest, John of Gaunt is not pulling any punches here. Basically what he has said is, you know, like, John of Gaunt may be physically dying, but Richard is kind of rotting from the inside out because he's been listening to these other people, the Bushy Bagot and Green, like the non-noble advisor type people that he has, have been steering him in the wrong direction, yet he keeps going to them for help. And Gaunt is like, if your grandpa knew what a terrible king you were gonna be, he would have made it so that you would never be king. Which is pretty mean, let's be honest. And I'm not saying it's not deserved. I didn't know King Richard personally, so maybe he did deserve it. And if he had Gloucester killed, who was his uncle, then maybe that's, you know, a legit complaint or whatever. Sorry, I lost my light. So yeah, he may not be the best king in the world. John of Gaunt is being very straightforward here, hoping that Richard listens to him and cleans up his act and turns into a better king. But Richard shuts him down with like, "You're old and stupid and frail." But Gaunt isn't done trying yet, and we will get to hear more of that tomorrow. I will see you then. Mwah.